Hello, everyone. I hope that you are all well. Here it is a sleepy Saturday, but I usually post these on Wednesdays. So happy Wednesday to you if you're watching when it comes out. All right, so today I just finished Plato's Republic. I had started this last year at some point, and then I don't know, I had some books that I kind of just abandoned not because I didn't like them, because I got distracted by other books. So this is the year of kind of picking some or maybe all of those up again and finishing them. So I'm just going to talk about Plato's ideas of the afterlife, which appear most comprehensively in Oxford divides his Republic up into 14 chapters, which is not traditional, but it's the last chapter, so it's the last section, I guess. And so if you don't know, and again, just, making these videos also for my students who are taking or going to take or have taken an intro to philosophy class with me. Plato's Republic is, of course, where the allegory of the cave appears. It appears kind of almost at the end as well, in the last few sections. And basically it's Plato's ideas are really, the main character is Socrates. And Socrates is talking to various people, some of his students, his disciples and followers, and then some people who like to involve themselves in debate with Socrates. And so we can say that it's Plato / Socrates' idea of sort of a perfect, ideal political community. And so he outlines kind of what he thinks the appropriate education is for people as they are growing up, his recommendations on how people kind of see themselves contributing and how they fit into society, which he calls his principle of specialization. Basically, he says that it's sort of not like today in most cultures where people just get to decide on what they want to do based on their likes, what's popular, what might make the most money, etc. But that people should really do what they were meant to do, in a sense, and sort of follow that. So maybe that might be what you are good at, what you can contribute best in, regardless of all of those other sort of timely or cultural or even personal situations of reward, etc. And let me think. What else? Oh, so this also, the principle of specialization, really kind of creates a context for the leaders of society. And he basically imagines a community led by philosopher-kings. And so there are various stages of sort of education and almost tests that all of the members of a society or this community go through, so that those who are most intellectually up for it and have the strongest character and also physical ability, etc., they will be the ones that should clearly be the leaders of this community. And the thing about politics in this sort of utopic community is that the positions are made so that you don't want to be a politician. So it's more like a public servant, and you're doing it because you are the best person for the job, but you're not. He just doesn't want there to be any sort of superficial or sort of immoral motives to become a leader or a politician. And he has a commentary on the various possibilities of a political structure of a community. And his is highly, would be described as sort of an ideal, uncorrupted aristocracy in a sense, because there are people that are, chosen based on their sort of noble, natural potentials, and on the promise that those potentials will be fulfilled. So he talks about and critiques dictatorships, which, I have jokingly kind of said in the past that Plato kind of sounds like a dictator, because in my mind I was equating that with, making all the decisions for everyone else and forcing them to go through, whatever, sort of indoctrination that you want them to go through. And, and then just the ideas that, Plato is very freely wanting to censor certain types of literature and certain music and activities, because anything that possibly corrupts the minds of the young. And of course, it's his personal idea of what is good and noble and how everything should go. So, but his idea of a dictator is a person with egoistic and selfish sort of, I guess, thoughts, so, or values and goals, etc. So I don't know, maybe Plato's Republic is just a good kind of dictatorship, the one that he thinks it should be. Or maybe I need to look at what the actual definition of a dictator is. But he is anti-democratic, because in a democracy, you have the common people, the public, making decisions, and also everyone has kind of the ultimate freedom, or a great deal of freedom to make their own choices for lifestyle, etc. You have choices, and there's just almost sometimes an infinite number of choices, it seems like. And he says that this creates people who are kind of lazy and distracted by, different motives such as fame or money. And so people really need to have a good, harmonious, orderly society where everyone is contributing and where power is not corrupted. There's just a very specific sort of, I don't want to say, like, system or schedule that everyone has to adopt and agree to. And it's kind of like that kind of sense of power where, you convince enough people that it is the right way to have a community. And he starts off in the Republic. I guess it's kind of summary of the Republic. He starts off, it's after sort of this, or during this festival of a goddess, and they're in someone's home, and they're talking about, they're having a conversation about happiness, the good life, and morality. So what does it mean to be a moral person, and do we even want to be good moral people? Because are those the people who are the happiest? So there's this character named Thrasymachus, and and he is sort of the one who is the cynic, and kind of the, maybe even the realist, some would say, depending on your perspective. And he talks, his argument is that, you can be good, but that's not what gets you ahead in society. If you look at the people that are around you, and we might say that this perspective might be valid today, who are the people who are the wealthiest, who are the most financially comfortable, who have the best sort of, maybe reputation might not be the right word, but are honored in society, or at least, there's attention toward them. They're somewhat celebrated. who wins. It's the person that sometimes has the sort of mentality, maybe that it's business, it's not personal. And they do what they need to do. They're assertive. They don't put empathy necessarily first, or they're not necessarily always cautious. Sometimes they have to do what needs to be done to make money. For instance, in certain colleges right now, especially because of the pandemic, there are certain choices being made. And I think this has probably actually happened, this has happened before the pandemic as well. Choices about what classes are most economical to offer and what classes and disciplines and subjects are maybe not profitable. And so regardless of whether they inspire creativity and foster well-being and foster sort of or instigate kind of an evolved humanity that is widely read and has a diverse set of interests and, et cetera, all of these kind of benefits that don't necessarily have a price tag on it. I think that there are many colleges where their leaders are very blatantly saying, well, we just can't, that doesn't matter. This is a business, and if no one wants to take philosophy out in the world, then we're not going to have a philosophy department. And it is that, and that's not an over-exaggeration. This is not hyperbole. So these are actually conversations being had. And so, but that is perhaps the outcome of some certain political systems that are, on the democratic side, for instance. You can make those people can make those choices. And if they are, there's not necessarily a focus on specific things. And Plato has his ideas on, what's most important, the priorities of life. His priorities are having a good character, not kind of being stoic in pursuit of the defense of the community and in terms of the sufferings of life. He doesn't want any stories or plays or poems that kind of glorify grief and sadness and like self-pity. He wants everyone to be sort of fearless and courageous, and this takes a very particular educational protocol and, some might call it indoctrination, because there are various parts. There is a part in here where he says that we are even going to bury actual historic facts because they will not inspire people. So there's really, he really doesn't mind, manipulating and modifying history, culture, every sort of sphere, and having a certain level of control, because that is what is good for us, and he knows what is good. So that's why it sounded a little totalitarian to me. But what can I say? I'm like postmodern gal in so-called democracy. So what can I say? But I don't know. But I guess being an academic and being literary minded, if I can, so he talks about, for instance, how just almost all of painting and poetry should just not be allowed. And so I think that, especially, if I'm going to be teaching this to my students, I would ask my students to maybe look at an analogy. What kind of cultural manifestations of entertainment and learning might some of us sort of critique as being maybe lowbrow, maybe being distracting, maybe, to use Plato's or Socrates' words, corrupting the youth. You know, so we have to understand that, you know, Plato didn't have TV, radio, etc. But those are maybe what we would, or social media. You know, there are certain forms of entertainment that are sometimes critiqued to the extent that some people would wish them completely away. And Plato says, you know, if painters and poets want to argue for moral benefit, then all the better, because we all enjoy it, right? So we might say this, so we have to think of like an analogy for our times, I think, to kind of understand. But I think that to some extent he is convincing, you know. I mean, maybe there is kind of a, you know, a choice that one has to make between freedom and the common good. I won't be right back. I just had to check and see if there's something in my eye. Okay, let's see. Well, fine. Okay, I think I'm back for good. So instead of put my hair up, just because I felt like it. All right, so, you know, one of the good things is that in his well, to women anyway, I guess, is that even in this classical Greek text, Plato / Socrates says that, you know, everything is going to be open to women as well. If there is a woman who is going to be a great philosopher-king, then let her be that philosopher queen. I don't know. She could still be a king, I guess. So anyway, so going back to sort of this, so this is what is being developed, but within the wider context of this sort of Thrasymachus-Socrates debate, where, you know, Socrates wants to respond to Thrasymachus to say that no, there are benefits and rewards to being moral and to being good. But one of his caveats leads us into the last chapter and Plato's understanding of the afterlife. Because maybe you will only be rewarded in another life or in the afterlife. All right, so let's go ahead and get to it. Hopefully that is, so being moral, I mean, his idea is though that being moral will make you happy. In a stoic way, where you're just happy regardless of circumstances. Because he says there's always a reason for your suffering if you are a good person. And the goodness, the good life that the wicked seem to have sometimes will either, karma will enter, to borrow from another tradition and culture, will meet them in their old age or in another life. All right, so we're going to go to chapter 14. I'll try to read some parts of it as I'm giving commentary. But his basic idea is that, well, no, we'll start with the text. All right. But hopefully that was a somewhat decent summary of the Republic. All right, so the first line or quote that I underlined is, and he's talking with, he goes back and forth after Thrasymachus disappears somehow and never reappears. So, but they say, well, we'll get these messages to him. So it's Socrates talking with Glaucon is one, Adeimantus is another, and there are a few others, but I think those are the two like main people that he's talking to Glaucon, I think, in his last chapter. And he says that our mind is immortal and never dies. So Plato / Socrates believes in, I'm just going to say Plato because it's Plato's Republic, but know that Socrates is the one speaking. He believes in reincarnation And he believes in sort of a place of limbo, in a sense. There's two places of limbo, or two paths of sort of this intermediate pause between incarnations. And one is pleasant and smooth, and the other is rocky and kind of reminds you of hell. So he knows about the afterlife, though, because of this person who had a near-death experience called Air, I think. Air, I don't know how to, I was going to pronounce it in a different way, but apparently I don't know how to. That's the only, it's ER. So he had a near-death experience. He was like this great warrior, and he apparently died for 12 days, but then he was resurrected, and he said, hey, I was taught what happens to all of us. So that's how it happens. Kind of a cool little story within the story. All right, but he wants to point out that our mind is immortal and never dies. So we have to, when we're thinking about morality and the good life and happiness, we have to look beyond our own current lifespan. And so basically, after kind of trying to reiterate that the good life is truly good personally and beneficial, he brings up this near-death experience. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, well, here's something interesting. Actually, I'm just skipping all my notes. So he has this idea that he points out, he makes this observation that, well, it seems as if for much of the finite, much of the material, that can be hurt and injured and perish, but not so with our minds. So you can kind of think of, to kind of illustrate his point, that when you are very sick, whether it's like, well, very sick is relative, right? So let's just say something people commonly experience. When you have the flu, or you have a really bad cold, or something, even like a chronic illness, not that it doesn't affect your mental state, but you can still, it doesn't infect your mind. Like, you can still think about your illness. You can think about how you wish you were well. And, maybe depending on the extent of your physical illness, you can still read, you can still maybe do remote work. Getting really contemporary here. But it's not, when you say you have a cold, it's your body, or the flu, your body has the flu. It's not your mind that has the flu. And also the same thing with, maybe I should read the quote first. No, there is actually no quote. It's just a thought. So it's just a summary of this page. You can think of also aging. So our bodies age, but our minds don't. Of course, there are diseases of the mind, but generally, for many, many people, you are aging, and your body shows. Your body is like going through, after a sort of peak age. For most people, I guess you can combat it as much as you want, and there are people who are 80 and like healthier than 20-year-olds. Of course, there's variation, but on the whole, on some level, our bodies are slowly breaking down and degenerating, and aging shows up physically as particular signs on our body and within our bodies. But our minds, in contrast, get better and better, ideally, and for the most part. You know, the longer you live, the more knowledge you accumulate, the more books you read, the more conversations you have, the more experiences you have, the more observations you make, conclusions you make. And, you know, and maybe in terms of self-development, maybe not as common, perhaps, I don't know, because some people, I guess, some of us get bitter as we get older, or more cynical or jaded because we've seen too much. You know, a lot of us get, or some of us become more compassionate and empathic and attuned to suffering, and our priorities maybe get reorganized in a way that Plato would appreciate. And so it's kind of like intellectually, emotionally, every, you know, sort of aspect of your mind improves, you know, up until, you know, it doesn't exist in this life form anymore. So, you know, so Plato, to feminists' dissatisfaction, and maybe like a lot of people's dissatisfaction, he's prioritizing the mind and doesn't care so much about the body. In my gender studies program, let's say, that was highly critiqued. And even if you think about like the reading of like Simone de Beauvoir, she wants to bring back in, re-emphasize the body because it's our material state and it is important, etc. But in terms of immortality and in terms of those sort of ideas of the afterlife that include reincarnation for whatever reason, and, you know, Plato's reason, I don't think he really talks about an endpoint, or if he did, like an ultimate, you know, is it like in Hindu ideology or Buddhist ideology that you like break out of the cycle of suffering and birth and death and rebirth. I don't know if that was super clear in here in Plato, if he talks about it. I don't think that was maybe his point to explain that. But lost my train of thought. This is why I should edit my videos, but I'm not going to. See, if I was actually in class, one of you could remind me. I don't know. I don't know. Let's see, you always have your mind. Okay, so when he's talking about immortality and wants to highlight morality, it's about the mind. So there's more focus on the mind with his ideals, his suggestions for his community. I don't know. Okay, so let's see. He says, before he talks about the near-death experience of air, is it? I think that's his name. Oh, okay. So here was an interesting little point and observation. He says, there must always be the same minds in existence. None of them can be destroyed, so their number cannot decrease, and it can't increase either. So there's this idea in his cosmology and doctrine of reincarnation that all of the sort of minds that could ever exist just constantly get recycled into different forms, and are not always on, we're talking about just the earth, which I guess he is, although he doesn't say it explicitly. If we're talking about just the earth, though, there is not all of the minds or existences will be on the earth at the same time, because some of them are going through this state of limbo that is 1,000 years. So basically, well, I want to go to the text instead of summarize it, but I also want to just summarize it. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here is the sort of explanation. I will summarize that one part though. So basically, what happens is you go through your life, have all the joys and sufferings, and it's your responsibility to try to become a moral and good person. At the end of your life, you have to go through 1,000-year waiting period. And if you've been a good person, you get to go through a portal that goes up to the sky, and then you get to have a nice time. This isn't really detailed in the Republic, but basically you are seeing new things, you're learning new things, it's a smooth, nice road, and you're just maybe enjoying yourself in this heavenly kind of existence for 1,000 years. So you get a little break from earthly existence, which I think sounds nice. I have said, strangely enough, before reading this, I hope I get a break of like at least 1,000 years before I have to come back. So I don't know, lots of people thinking the same thing without consulting each other. That is a phenomenon of the world. But if you weren't so good, then you go through a portal that takes you downward. And it is not great. And there is probably weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't know if you put it exactly like that, but something like that. There's tortures and not good things. If you're super, super bad, there are, you don't get to leave the portal. There is no ending. You are dismembered by, was it some sort of creature? I can't remember. It starts with a T. I should be able to remember this, but I'm not. Yeah, so you spend 1,000 years, and then when you get out of the portal, maybe I'm not going to read the book. I'm just going to describe it. It's just very vivid. There's a lot of interesting details, though. So when you get out of the 1,000-year journey, you appear in front of the fates, and you are given sort of a lottery ticket. And this shows the order that whoever has come out of the portal, because they spent their 1,000 years together, I guess, or they ended at the same time, you get a number, and then and that decides, whether you get to go first or second or third, etc. And what you are, going in order for is all of the sample possible lives that you could be reincarnated into. So we get to choose our existences, basically. So whatever life you have right now, you chose. That is the cosmology here in the Republic. So, but there are more, you're not too disadvantaged if you're the last person. You get to kind of see, what you can choose. So you can take it as long as you want to look at all the different lives. And, the sample lives, the choices tell you whether you are rich, you are poor, whether, what kind of happens in your life. It's a whole sort of history. It doesn't necessarily necessitate your temperament. And it's, it's deterministic in the characteristics of your life, how healthy you are, how sick you will be, etc. So you get to choose, you get to choose whether you want to come back as a human, as a non-human animal. Those are the options. I don't think you can come back as a plant, but yeah, I think it's just non-human animals and human animals. You can choose whether you want to be female or male. You can choose, all the things that you want to choose. And his point, or he made the observation that most people just want something different. Like a lot of people want a different experience. If they were rich, they want to be poor. Some people, if they were human, they want to be an animal now. Animals want to be humans, just, switching it up, I guess. Learning lots of lessons. And so basically, there are people who choose their lives wisely, and there are people who choose their lives poorly. So he gives several examples. This person who was able to spend 12 days, or the equivalent of 12 earthly days, viewing all of this that happens in the afterlife. Some people see something like a shiny little sample life incarnation object and run to it. Like, oh, now I just want to experience life as super rich or a celebrity, or I want to be a really powerful politician, etc. So some people see something and choose it really quickly without reading through all the details. You know, some of us are lazy. We don't want to read the fine print. We're just like, we got the details. It's fine. This is what I want. But they will end up regretting and being sad and being unhappy because they chose a combination of elements that will not make it easy for them to be moral, good, happy people. So he uses the last, so he concludes the Republic in talking about the afterlife because he makes the point that we should, while we are on earth, despite whatever culture we live in, whatever community we live in, what's rewarded, what's possible, we should try to figure out what is the best character, how to make the best decisions that are moral and good, and understand what our sense of ethics is so that we can go through the upward portal to the sky, which is nice, and enjoy our 1,000 years respite. And then when we get out, we can choose wisely a life that will perhaps sustain and maintain our good character and our morality, or help us improve. And it doesn't seem like there's an end to this, at least in the Republic. It's just existing morally and improving, but also enjoying the little pause that you get for 1,000 years every time. And in this whole situation, I guess, you know, if you made bad choices and you caused suffering to people, then somehow, even though you were making the choice, you will still be punished. So I don't exactly know how that works out, but there are those, yeah, two sort of elements to the afterlife and two consequences. So, you know, I mean, I would suggest anyone read it because there are some really interesting sort of visuals of the fates and rotating spindles and the colors they give off. They have auras. It's very good. Let me see if, just finishing up here, if there are any things. So says, for instance, and you get to choose your own deities as well. That's the other thing. You get to choose the god or the guide that kind of goes with you through life. So here is maybe I'll just read a little bit of this. It says, as soon as the souls arrived, they had to approach, and then I don't know how to say this name. Laetius? Maybe it's Laetius. An intermediary arranged them in rows. So these are all the people who have emerged from their portals after 1,000 years. And then once he'd taken from Laetius's lap lottery tokens and sample lives, stepped up onto a high rostrum and said, here are the words of Lady Laetius, daughter of necessity. You souls condemned to impermanence. The cycle of birth followed by death is beginning again for you. No deity will be assigned to you. You will pick your own deities. Sounds kind of like, you know, like the Hunger Games or the Island, or thinking of all like the movies who have incorporated some of these ideas. The order of gaining tokens decides the order of choosing lives, which will be irrevocably yours. Goodness makes its own rules. Each of you will be good to the extent that you value it. Responsibility lies with the chooser, not with God. After this announcement, he threw the tokens into the crowds, I guess, kind of like a host or something. And everybody except Air, who is the person who is like viewing this, so he can go back and tell all the human beings what's going to happen, picked up the token that fell beside him. Each soul's position in the lottery was clear once he'd picked up his token. Next, the intermediary placed on the ground in front of them the sample lives, of which there were far more than there were souls in the crowd. Every single kind of human and animal life was included among the samples. For instance, there were dictatorships, some lifelong, others collapsing before their time and ending in poverty, exile, and begging, and also male and female versions of lives of fame for one's physique, good looks, and general strength and athleticism, or for one's lineage and the excellence of one's ancestors. And there were lives which lacked these distinctions as well. This kind of reminds me of John Rawls' thought experiment, where in order to think about kind of the most equitable society we could create now, we would think of ourselves from a neutral position and then think about if we didn't know what kind of society, what would be rewarded in society, what kind of equality would happen. We didn't know, for instance, if you had a sickness, if there would be a system of insurance, if there would be particular doctors, etc. So you have to decide on the characteristics, and based on that, you would want a society that treated your disadvantages most fairly and didn't unfairly advantage or reward, didn't unfairly reward advantages, etc. So kind of reminds me of that a little bit. And there were lives which lacked these distinctions as well. Temperament wasn't included, however, since that inevitably varies according to the life chosen. But otherwise, there was every possible combination of qualities with one another and with factors like wealth, poverty, sickness, and health, in extreme or moderate amounts. So he says a little further down, we have to ask ourselves, what are the good and bad results of mixing, for instance, good? So we have to look at the combinations of these and try to predict what life we might actually kind of lead, right? So he says, for example, what are the good or bad results of mixing good looks with poverty or with wealth in conjunction with such and such a mental condition? What are the characteristics of various combinations of innate and acquired characteristics such as high and low birth, involvement and lack of involvement in politics, physical strength and frailty, cleverness and stupidity, and so on? He has to be able to take into consideration the nature of the mind and so to make a rational choice from among all the alternatives between a better and a worse life. So this is kind of what we have to learn and figure out in our earthly life by observing our own lives, observing the lives of others, and so we can make a good choice for our next life, a better choice, for instance. So let's see. It says that, so Air reports back what happens to the first person. So it says the person whose turn was first stepped up and chose the most powerful dictatorship available. His stupidity and greed made him choose this life without inspecting it thoroughly and in sufficient detail. So he didn't notice that it included the fate of eating his own children and committing other horrible crimes. You probably would have liked to read that, right? So when he took the time to examine his choice, he beat his breast and wept. But he didn't comply with the intermediary's earlier words because he didn't hold himself responsible for his afflictions. Instead, he blamed fortune, the gods, and anything rather than himself. It says he was one. Okay, so first, it kind of lays responsibility on the individual in a sense for the life that you have because you chose it, apparently. So it says, but why? This person did that. He was one of those who had come out of the heavens since he'd spent his previous life in a well-regulated community. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you have a good 1,000 years respite that you will make good choices, because the point is, did you learn something? So as we will see, suffering allows you to learn, to make better choices, I guess. So he'd spent his previous life in a well-regulated community and so had been good to a certain extent, even though it was habituation rather than philosophy that had made him so. In fact, those who had come from the heavens fell into this trap more or less as often as the others, since they hadn't learned how to cope with difficult situations. And then the next part of it is talking about that it says most of the souls met with a reversal from good to bad or vice versa. The point is this: if during his lifetime in this world, a person practices philosophy with integrity, and if it so happens as a result of the lottery that he is not one of the last to choose, then the report brought back from that other world makes it plausible to expect not only that he'd be happy here, but also that he'd travel from here to there and back again on the smooth roads of the heavens, rather than on rough underground trails. So it says their choice was invariably dictated by conditioning gained in their former incarnation. And then there's kind of interesting little examples about, for instance, the soul which had once belonged to Orpheus chose the life of a swan. Because women had killed him, he hated everything female and wanted to avoid a female incarnation. I don't know. It's kind of fun. The person who is able to choose last, I can't remember. No. Well, there was Atalanta. She says about halfway through, it was the turn of Atalanta's soul, and she caught sight of a male athlete's life. When she noticed how well rewarded it was, she couldn't walk on by, and she took it. After Atalanta, Air saw the soul of Epeus, the son of Panopeus. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. Traffic. Becoming a craftswoman. And later toward the end, he saw, okay, so someone wanted to become a monkey. Okay, the last person was Odysseus' soul. And he remembered all the hardship. So he walked around for a long time looking for a life as a non-political private system, which he was super happy with. So, yeah. So the last point, I guess, that I'll make, it's basically the penultimate paragraph, is that, so after all the choices were made, they had to do a few more days of traveling, and they finally camped out on this field they camped out on the plain of oblivion near the river of neglect. And they were all required to drink a certain amount of water. And this was basically a libation that determined how much of your past you forgot. So he says that some people, it says that, but some were too stupid to look after themselves properly and drank more than the required amount. As each person drank, he forgot everything. So I think that there's that maybe this kind of goes back to what he says in some of his other writings about how you want to try to remember try to remember the images of like the gods as you're circling around them. I guess maybe that's a part of your 1,000-year journey. And what you remember from your past lives, you can remember a certain sense. Or you can maybe not remember the finite, but you can remember, or the concrete, but you can get kind of a feeling of a past life or past wisdom, which I think we all have sort of inclinations of. So it doesn't seem too far-fetched. I mean, it's at least the way Plato could imagine it. So all in all, I really loved the Republic. I might do some other videos on the chapters. I know there's probably a lot of videos on Allegory of the Cave, so I probably won't do that. But for instance, let me just go over some of the chapters. Of course, these chapters title names are superimposed by Oxford editions. And I would say about Oxford World's Classics is that It's a very accessible translation, which some scholars might see as problematic because it's almost like it's too modern in the rhetoric. I don't know. I would say that it depends on who you are and what your goals are. For someone's first reading of the Republic, you might as well enjoy it. Oxford World Classics has really enjoyable translations of the Republic. So, you know, probably if you're going to, you know, take classes and learn Greek and Latin and be a classicist, then you'll read other translations. But if you are, even if you're just, you know, an undergraduate in philosophy, I think this is a really good translation. So the titles are, let's see, there's Primary Education for the Guardians, The Guardians' Life and Duties, Inner and Outer Morality, Women, Children, and Warfare. There's a chapter completely on philosopher-kings. The Supremacy of Good is chapter 9 in this, and that is where I think the Allegory of the Cave is in. Educating philosopher-kings, there's a chapter called Warped Minds, Warped Societies. And then chapter 12 is Happiness and Unhappiness. 13 is Poetry and Unreality, where he kind of lambasts poetry and painting. And so do not see them like Heidegger sees it. But Heidegger's only talking about great poetry. And Rewards Now and Hereafter, which is the last chapter that I was mainly talking about. So yeah, it's super fun. You get to see how Socrates is flirting with all his disciples as well. Like, there were, not gonna lie, several places where I said get a room because it was just a little too much for me, but you know, that's the fun of reading and philosophy. Okay, so thank you so much for listening, for engaging. As always, I'm probably always going to be rambly because that's what happens when you just decide to turn on the camera and start talking, because that's what it is. You know, I don't know. That's just what I'm doing. They're my cold thoughts, I guess. So anyway, yeah, so the other things that I'm reading right now, if you just want to stick around to listen, let's see, it is the beginning of August. I am sort of getting ready to start prepping for my actual classes. And but what I do most of the day is just read a lot. Let's see. So I'm reading, now that I've finished Being in Time from Heidegger, I'm reading his essays on poetry and art. And I also am reading his essays on technology and Nietzsche, etc. So essays of Heidegger. I am still kind of in the beginning stages of my readings of Whitehead. I switched to modes of thought, mostly because I'm so impressionable and I kept reading and hearing that Process and Reality was too difficult to start with. And just reminds me of when I was a little girl in elementary school and I went to the library and the librarian said, because I was holding a book in my hand and she was telling me that Charles Dickens was too difficult for me. And I'm like, you don't know me. But I put it back because I'm not the type of person to say, oh, that's a challenge, I'm going to do it, which would be, you know, a much better way to be. But I'm like, oh, you're probably right. I can't do it. So anyway, I will go back to Process and Reality, but I thought, you know, why not? I have Modes of Thought and Adventures of Ideas. So is that what it's called? I think so. So, I mean, I'm liking those as well. I don't know. I need to have more self-confidence. And I know people don't say that. People don't say, I mean, the librarian, I'm not sure. But people around me who are saying that are mostly probably saying it in a positive way, like, oh, that's really impressive. But I just take it in a negative way. And I'm like, oh, maybe I'll start with another book first. I don't know. I'm a mess. But anyway, so I'm reading Modes of Thought. I'm putting a pause on Process and Reality, I guess. And what else am I reading? I'm reading a book of like a mythology reader by someone named Barry Powell. So I'm just in the early stages of that. I'm reading a short sort of commentary on Foucault because I want to get back into reading Foucault. I've read a lot of Foucault, like his 3 volumes of the history of sexuality. And I think now there's a 4th volume from his scraps and fragments, etc., that was like unpublished during his lifetime, but is now published by his nephew. I don't know. So I don't know. I haven't read that, but I really like Foucault. I think it's really interesting, regardless of whether he is accurate or not, his relation or his articulation of history. But I'm reading just like the short, it's like a how-to read, Foucault, so by Simon Crichtley. I really like that series of books. And then hopefully I'm not going over. You know what? I'm going to end it right now. I'm reading about 5 or 6 books up. But I will see you next time. I just think I am almost out of time for my podcast. Hopefully I'm not too much out of time. Okay, I will see you next time. Thanks a lot. Put your comments below, your questions, your thoughts. If you want me to talk more about the Republic, tell me what you want me to talk about.